Hi, it's John here again with another Indie Creative Journey. And this time we've got the lovely Melanie Curtin who's going to talk to us about her trip around the world in 80 lays. And before we dive into that, Melanie, maybe you could talk a little bit about what lights you up in the morning. What is it that kind of really, gets you going?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, right now, I would say I'm transitioning to sort of making my own way in the world rather than just working for other people. So, what lights me up is setting up all the stuff to make that possible and figuring out like the creative process and how that intersects with making money.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the challenge for a lot of us, who are indie creatives or artists, is finding that balance between, like kind of the artistic side and the entrepreneurial side. And so that's absolutely one of the main reasons why I do this show and stuff like that. Was there like along the way, something that kind of got you started on this journey? Like, what was it that kind of inspired you kind of beyond doing just the 9 to 5 or just doing like kind of work, per se and getting a paycheck?
Well, let's see. I mean, I've been blogging about sex and dating for a couple years now, and actually, the reason that I started my blog originally was that I had my period and I was like really moody, and I figured that instead of just moping, I would write an article about it. And so I did, and I just wrote an article about how 70% of crimes committed by women are done within 2 to 3 days of their period. And I just wrote a was the first three, and I noticed that it took me about 2 hours to write it, put up all the graphics, create the whole thing, and publish. And I felt like if I started out feeling like a two, I felt like an eight by the end of
Hmm.
it out of 10. Like I just felt better. I felt
Wow.
better. And I noticed that like being creative has that effect on me. When I practice my craft of writing or doing video or creating, I physically feel better. And I took note of that as like, oh, this is important. This is needs to be a part of my life on an ongoing basis. Um, and then I think it also served people. Like a lot of women can feel sort of alienated at that part of the month because they feel like they're the only ones who feel that
Mhm.
way. Like it's like we go insane for a few days every single month, and it can be really disorienting. So it was really nice to get that sort of feedback from people that it was like a relief to have the subject dealt with in like a fun, funny way. It was also meaningful. And I think that's really what I love about my stuff is that I deal with topics like that in a way that's accessible, but also kind of like we don't have to take it so seriously. Like we can, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, we're going to talk about sex. And I even talk about like I'm an advocate for victims of sexual abuse and it's a really serious topic, but there's a way that we can deal with sex positivity that's not quite so like serious and heavy. And I think that's what my gift is sort of walking that line.
Absolutely. It's funny. You said it's several different things that I really want to hit on and stuff. One of the key things, of course, is like along the lines of what you just said about, using humor and kind of taking things lightly and stuff, but also about, connecting with others. Like some of the different things that I've observed too, that is how you are very observant and you really kind of bring all those different elements into, your way of observing and stuff. Were there folks that inspire you to that? Like, what that kind of like with what kind of people like along the way gave you that inspiration that like this is something that kind of where I want to do something like what they do or they gave you some like the trail if you will that like they've kind of blazed a little bit and stuff.
Yeah. I would say specifically for my book, it was definitely Chelsea Handler. I read Chelsea Handler's book called My Horizontal Life, a series of one night stands, and I thought, I can do this. I can do this. Like halfway through the book, I was like, I could do this. I could do this better. Because I realized about halfway through her book that some of the stories were fake. And that's cool. Like she's a comedian and she's a great writer and in a way it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not, but I remember reading it and having a distinct moment of thinking I could do this, and this book was a bestseller. like with what I have now, the life experience I have now, I don't have to go out and learn more. I don't have to do anything else. I can just write about what I've gone through and make it fun, and it'll sell and it'll be fun to do. Because at the time I was writing, but it wasn't really on a regular basis. And I was really looking for something bigger to do. And I realized that in actuality, a book doesn't have to take that long to write. I kind of broke it down by pages and said, if I have a 90-page Word document, that's a book. That's about 120 to 150 pages in book form. And 90 pages is 3 pages a day for a month. I can do that. I thought I can do that. And that's what I did. I wrote it in a sprint of 30 days.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about writing is that, committing to a time and just basically there is no shortcut. There is no, like people try to like, oh, what's the secret? And all, you got to sit and write. You got to do it. So like along that process and stuff, was there like a moment though that like you really kind of struggle? Like, like people always talk about writer's block and stuff. So like, was there that kind of moment that like you really kind of go, oh man, like I don't know about this, and you really second guess yourself and kind of like, wait a minute, like maybe how do I just kind of like find my way and stuff?
Yeah, I think what I would say about it is it was definitely a commitment. It was a slug. Like I would, it took me about 2 hours every day to write 3 pages, and sometimes it was excruciating. I'd be like, okay, I've done 1 page, 1 3/4 pages. I've got 1 1/4 to go. And I'd make myself tea and I'd psych myself up. And the days that I was organized about it, I would write in the morning for at least 45 minutes. And then I would feel like, okay, I've got, 3/4 of a page under my belt. The days that it was the hardest were when it was nighttime already and I hadn't done anything, and it was like 11 at night. And I was like, okay, well, here we go. Like I'm going to be up to 1 in the morning.
Wow.
And the way I did it for me was I structured it so that I was supposed to do 3 pages a day, but if I didn't do enough pages one day, I could make them up the next day. So, or if I was inspired, and this did happen sometimes, and I wrote 4 pages, I only had to do 2 the next day. So I had flexibility in the way that I did it. But yeah, there were definitely times that I was like, oh my God, I'm exhausted and I don't feel like doing this. And I did it anyway. The days that I really was like, I'm having a hard time, I gave myself a break and said, you can make it up tomorrow. Like, I didn't torture myself, but there were definitely times where it was like, I don't really feel like it, but I'm going to do it anyway. And almost inevitably, I felt better after. Like, there's something about the creative process and letting something like come through me that does make me feel better. So even if I was going to bed later, I ultimately felt better, like overall. And I can tell you that I wrote the book in 30 days and then I edited it in another 30-day sprint. Not the same, it wasn't chronologically the next month, but I did do that in another sprint. And those months are some of the best months of my life because I just felt so kind of on purpose. Like, wow, I'm doing something extraordinary here. And I feel like I'm making progress every day, because every day you're seeing, more pages, and you look back and you're like, okay, I've got 45 pages, I've got 65 pages. Like, I'm really on my way. And that's an incredible feeling.
Yeah, it is. I can definitely identify, and I can also hear it in your voice, and that's awesome. The thing about also that process of stuff, one of the cartoons I remember you sharing, and it's one that I share a lot actually with readers, and is about, it basically has on one panel your plan and stuff, and it's like kind of shows like this straight line and stuff like that, and the other one shows like this poor guy is like kind of hitting like this storm and like hills and dips and all kind of stuff, and I feel like that's part of the creative process. It very just absolutely captures like kind of what you encounter as a creative entrepreneur on your journey and stuff. Melanie, I wanted to ask you about like along the ways of this kind of journey that you were on, what kind of helped you with the process? What, did you find other folks to kind of bring into to basically? I think you mentioned before about having beta readers. What was it that kind of like? How did that come about?
Yeah, so I've worked in tech for a number of years, and most of the time in tech, when you're rolling out a new product, you do a beta launch, so you don't roll it out completely to everyone. You choose a group of people and you kind of test it with them. So you have your first version of the product and you send it to 50 or 100 people or however many you're going to do, and then they give you feedback, you work out the bugs, you figure out what's important, what's not needed, things like that, and then you roll out your real launch. And I knew that I wanted to do something like that for the book because I knew that I wanted to make sure that it was going to be serving people, and I also like didn't have a really good sense of who my audience was. I thought it was going to be women, but I really wasn't sure. The book is called Around the World in 80 Lays, and it's kind of like Sex in the City meets Eat, Pray, Love. So it's a series of sexcapades, international and domestic, and it's really fun. It's like a beach read, and I wasn't really sure if it was going to connect more with women or men. I was pretty sure it was going to be women, but I didn't know what age range. There were just a bunch of question marks. So what I did was I picked 20 people to invite, and I sent them an email and I said, do you want to do this? It would involve, you would get a sneak preview of the book. You would read the book before anyone else and then answer a series of questions. And I would incorporate your feedback. Like, you'll have a real impact on this finished product. I picked almost all people I knew, although I did pick a few fans that I didn't know. They were basically strangers, but mostly people that I knew and trusted, because it was also like my creative project. So I wanted to feel supported, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, I didn't want them to hold back if there was stuff they didn't like, but I also wanted to feel supported, because ultimately I think as artists, there's something really important about getting encouragement along the way. And I don't think that we should feel bad about wanting that, needing that, figuring out ways to get that, because for us to put our voice out there can be scary, and to just have a few people that's like, listen, this is really valuable, this is good, is so encouraging, because we can think it's good or not good, but until we get eyes on it, it's not, it's just sort of like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like something in the ether. Whereas once real people were reading it and real people were giving me feedback, I was like, oh, this is a real thing. This is actually going to be a book.
Definitely. I think that's the thing of, with indie creatives is the idea that, as an artist, we're putting our best work out there, but as an entrepreneur, we're getting feedback from the world and to, basically, like you said, get a sense of, what the world is saying that they want, or that, like, but at the same time, it's definitely a delicate balance, because as an artist, like you said, we want to feel nurtured, and we want to feel encouraged and stuff. And we want to basically, kind of not just simply, kind of do everything that, like, that everybody is wants, or, like, kind of the lowest denominator and stuff like that. We want to, like, kind of basically, we do have a vision of what it means for us, and what we're creating and stuff like that. And so finding that balance is, really tricky. So, how did you kind of ultimately develop, through working with the beta readers? Like, what was it that kind of really stood out for you as to how to bring their feedback and take it forward and shape it into the ultimate product and stuff?
So when I had my beta readers read the book, I had them rate each chapter on a scale
Hmm.
of 0 to 10. And then I had a couple of questions for them, overall questions. So the rating and I had them just say 3 adjectives that came to mind when they thought about these chapters. And then they could give more specific feedback. So what I got to see was that there were certain chapters that were very polarizing. People either loved them or hated them.
Hmm.
And then there were other chapters that were consistently rated very high. And then there were other ones where they were consistently rated lower. So what it helped me identify was, oh, here are the 3 chapters that really need work. And I listened to the feedback of what people were saying. And essentially what they were saying was, I didn't really like you in this chapter, or I couldn't really relate to you in this chapter. And so and most of those chapters were also the ones that I already knew I needed to work on, but I didn't quite know exactly in what way. And after reading their feedback, I realized, oh, I need to put more vulnerability into all of these chapters. Like I need to put where I'm insecure in those chapters, because again, my book is sex stories. And if you read a book about someone who thinks they have it all together in bed, it's not as relatable as like, here's this thing that I'm struggling with, or here's this thing that didn't go well, or here's where I felt embarrassed. And as soon as I put more of my heart into those chapters and more of my vulnerability, they improved. I mean, immediately. And I would say the finished product is much stronger for that. The places where the book was already strong, I just kind of didn't focus on, obviously. And then also the chapters that were very, very polarizing, I didn't really touch those either, because I was fine with that. Like this chapter will start a dialogue. This chapter it's taking a really strong stand, and some people are going to like it and some people aren't. I'm okay with that. I'm not going to dumb it down or water it down to try to please everyone, because it's just impossible. And not to mention, it's my truth. Like, this really happened. These are true stories of mine. So I wasn't going to change things or try to make people happy. It was like, here's my truth. This is what happened. And this is how I felt about it. And for some people, it's really uncomfortable. And for some people, it was like, oh my God, you're saying things that I've never heard anyone say. And I just relate to you so much. So a lot of it, I think, also had to do with people's personal backgrounds, if they'd had the experience or not. It informed how they felt about the whole story or book.
I mean, I have to admit that like it was sometimes hard to read as a friend and somebody who knew you like from different points and stuff. But at the same time, it was really it touched me, you know, like just to kind of hear your vulnerability as well, or to read it, and I think that's the thing that like really is scary, but so true though, as an artist, different times to basically present that side of yourself. So how did you like, you know, reach that point though? How were you able to basically, you know, share that part of yourself, you know, like that really like it's so often, you know, so hard for us to do. What was it that kind of like helped you with that process?
I think that like sexuality is my calling in this life. And so it's a part of me that I find I'm very comfortable with in a lot of ways. And I think that that's necessary for what I'm here to do in the world. Like, I think that there's a way that I'm open about it that comes to me naturally, that is helpful and of service to a lot of people. And I'm grateful for it, because if I didn't have it, I couldn't do what I do. So, for example, I don't feel that vulnerable putting out sex stories the way that I did. I feel more vulnerable with like measuring myself financially. Like, there are other aspects of my life where I do feel a lot of vulnerability, but it's not this one. And there were a lot of women in particular who wrote me after and said like, wow, I really liked your book and it helped me let go of a lot of shame. And I think that's part of what the purpose of it is. And I couldn't have told you that at the beginning. I wasn't like, I'm going to write this book so that I can help women let go of shame. Like, that wasn't how it worked. It's more like, I am a genuinely sex positive person. I do genuinely enjoy it. I have a good time. I connect with men in that way, and it feels good, you know, emotionally and physically. And I think just having those stories of a woman having a good time is needed and is healing for a lot of people. So it's kind of like getting at the issue of sex positivity from the positive angle and from a fun place instead of just sort of a heavy place, like I was saying before. So I think for me, it's something that comes naturally that I feel like I need to make sure that I keep cultivating, because it is important and it is part of my journey that I get to share with the world.
Was there like kind of some moment that like you found that that people that really reached out to, like you said, about that they appreciated you sharing, and then helping them to understand their own vulnerability and like kind of what were some
Yeah.
what were some of the folks that kind of shared about what they felt in
Yeah. So I had actually had a number of men um, reach out and say that they were recommending
yeah.
the book to a woman friend of theirs. And sometimes that woman friend ended up getting in touch with me. And I think that was probably because those men knew which of their women friends would really get something out of it and which of their women friends would appreciate it. And I think that they did identify the right people, because a lot of the time those women were the ones that ended up saying, like, thanks for writing this. It really helped me kind of let go of a lot of things about my past that I was holding on to, like that I was ashamed of. And I feel a lot freer. That was kind of the feedback that I ended up getting a lot, was I just feel like more free. Like I just feel like lighter around it and just more free. And that is really inspiring to me, because when you come from a place of freedom, you can just have so many more adventures, and it can just feel more exciting to be alive and to have that part of yourself expressed. And that's where I think a lot of people, especially women, are kind of locked up or tight, or there's a lot of hurt or pain or trauma around that. And to loosen or let go of any part of that, I think is majorly of service. And probably the best part of writing the book was getting those messages.
Sex takes on a different meaning, in that text. It's like something that, like, you're more worried about all these other things, and like, to even find the moment you can be intimate with someone is like very hard, versus, we're not living in that kind of world. We're living in a world where so many of our needs are taken care of so easily, and we have the luxury of time to, like, basically, like, kind of just, like you said, enjoy a moment and stuff. And I think that's the thing that, like, we don't really realize, and we don't kind of like basically allow ourselves. And I think that the things that, like, have to do with, like, kind of the heaviness, all the kind of things, that's like kind of, to me, the world where, like, you're worried about survival, but we're not in that world anymore. So it's like, kind of, I guess what I'm saying is, like, that's probably the biggest shift that we're slowly making, is that, like, we don't have the same kind of like the things that have to do with, like, kind of all these different contracts and all these kind of legal things, that all has to do with that world, and we're not in that world. And I think that's the thing that, like, somebody like yourself is helping us to recognize. It's like, we can have fun, like, kind of, what a concept, like, kind of, sex can be something that, like, is just about two people being intimate and enjoying a moment and stuff. And I really got that from your writing and everything. And I think that's the thing that, like, really comes across with, like, where, as a guy reading it, I think that's a thing that sometimes we also forget, is, like, because we tend to think of, this typical stereotypes that, like, women just want a relationship where they just want to have all these different things and stuff. And we kind of, project, like, these different things that we were taught. So I think that's the thing that, like, you, to me, convey, is that, like, a woman, it's not even so much about a woman being like a guy. They can be feminine, but yet just kind of have, like, what is stereotypically a guy's attitude towards sex. Like, kind of, I think that's one of the things that I got from, the things you wrote and everything. So, is there, like, kind of things that you also, like, I mean, I guess not too much to get into too much of the things that you talk about in the book, but are there things that you still feel are missing, that, like, like, beyond the stories that you told in Around the World in 80 Lays, what are some of the stories that you feel like still need to be told, like, maybe in different ways or by different people, or, what do you feel like in the, the dialogue of sex and sex attitudes and stuff is still kind of missing even today?
I think one thing that I really appreciated at the Oscars this year was there was a lot of talk about victims of sexual abuse and healing from sexual abuse. Lady Gaga performed an original song about that, and
Yeah.
she has been pretty public about her story. I think that's the dialogue that I would like to see more of. Those are the stories I'd like to see more of. Is I was sexually abused or I was sexually assaulted when I was a teenager. I got, somatic therapy, I got talk therapy, and I feel a lot better and I'm in a healthy relationship. And I think Lady Gaga is a great example of that, because as someone, I worked for an organization to stop sexual abuse, and I'm aware of how incredibly prevalent it is, and it is incredibly prevalent. But it's like having those stories that are women and men. It happens to lots and lots and lots of boys. Having those people come out and say, "This happened to me, and I've gotten therapy, and I'm better." Not I'm perfect. There is no perfect, but like I feel healthy in this regard. I feel like I'm on my way to just be talking about it more, to have it out there. And the way that Lady Gaga did it, having all of those survivors on the stage, she, at the end, all these survivors came out and they all held hands and they raised their hands together, like to know that you're not alone. I think my book is a sex positive example, and I'm incredibly fortunate to not have gone through sexual abuse. I've never been sexually assaulted, but I'm a huge advocate, and I speak out about it because it's incredibly important, and it's one of the most traumatic things that can happen to a person. And there is an aspect of it that is about, release work and trauma and everything. And then there's an aspect of it that's like reclaiming your femininity or your masculinity, reclaiming your sexual pleasure, reclaiming your sexual power. And I think that's kind of where my work has gone, is like, hey, here's what it's going to look like when it just feels good, when you feel like you have healthy boundaries and it can be fun and it's an enjoyable part instead of this scary thing that doesn't feel good. Like, because that's the reality for a lot of people, a lot of women and men. But I'm a woman, so I identify with that side more. And I think there's that step of like, I'm a huge advocate of bodywork therapy and talk therapy, but in particular therapies that involve the body, because I believe trauma is stored in the cells of our body, and bodywork therapy can help you get better faster. I've seen more progress in survivors that are using bodywork therapies. But then once you are at a certain point, it's like, and this is going to be a good part of your life. It's not going to be the scene of a crime. And I find that really inspiring. And I was thrilled with the Oscars this year. I feel like the reaction to Kesha's court case has been inspiring too. Like, there's a lot more people talking about it, and that makes me really happy, because every time people talk about it, those crisis lines get more phone calls, more people feel like they can call a therapist. They're not alone. They're not the only person it happened to. So that's the story I would like to hear more, is more people, women and men, who are like, hey, this happened to me and I'm doing my work, I'm getting my therapy, and I'm feeling better. And we can all do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the thing, as you said, is about, connecting with others and letting folks know that they're not alone. And I feel like that's definitely one of the messages in your book. Along with that is also, I felt that you really shared your journey. Like you saw that it wasn't like a linear thing and stuff like that. It was very much the up and down, again, like the things we talked about the journey of an artist. It was just like, how did the process of the book itself and writing it transform you?
That's a good question. Well, part of the interesting thing about this book was that it was my memories. So I was trying to remember, some things that had taken place 8 years before. And
wow.
There were parts of the process where I was like, I don't remember exactly what happened here or exactly what we said. And so I had to make some things up to reconstruct them from memory. But I think just going over my sort of sexual history in that way, honestly, kind of made me realize how far I have to go, actually. Like, I feel like I am a sexually empowered woman, and I don't feel like I'm like there yet. Like, I think there's a lot left for me to explore. And I think that I I would like to get better at initiating sex in like a fun way with a partner. I think there's a lot to be explored in Tantra and, like breathing together and keeping your eyes open. I think just it sort of was like, oh yeah, I've come a long way, but there's actually a lot of growth left for me to do because I'm not, I see sometimes I see examples of other women that I would consider sexually empowered who I feel like are much further along the path than me and kind of own their sexuality in a way that I haven't yet.
I think that's a great point what you just said, and it's funny how you and I met, of course, through tango, and you've probably heard the expression about it being a vertical expression of our horizontal desire, and I feel it's the same way with like in relationships at the times is that you can get when the sex gets stale is that you don't feel like there's anywhere to explore and there's nothing to be curious about. And yeah, so I absolutely do understand and agree that like that's the thing of having that sense of curiosity is pretty key in everything. Mm-hmm. And so what do you feel is next? What are like kind of some of the things that you would like to do with like helping others with your own stories or with their stories?
I would say that what's next for me is building my audience, like creating a community around the stuff that I want to talk about and that I do talk about. Because like I wrote an article, my top 3 sex problems as a woman, and I embedded a survey and over 1,000 people responded. And there are a lot of people who want to talk about these kinds of things. And there isn't really a lot of good spaces to do that. So I think what's next for me is being consistent and building an audience and a following and a movement around that, because I think especially the more that we all share with each other, the more we're going to, like the faster we're going to progress basically, because it sort of does come back to that thing about not feeling alone. Like I think there are a lot of couples who feel alone in what they're struggling with that they really aren't, but there's sort of taboos around talking about it. And I want to help break some of those down.
Yeah, I feel like we've come a long way, but there's definitely, still a long way to go as well. And so I absolutely agree that that's, like kind of the ground to break, if you will. So what's the best way for folks to learn more about you, to kind of connect with you and to kind of go from there?
If you go to my website, melaниecurtin.com, that's the best place to catch up with all of my work. And if you sign up for my list on that site, then you'll be updated when I come out with things, and you'll get sneak peeks of stuff that I'm working on and be able to vote on some things and things like that.
Awesome. Thanks, Melanie. Really appreciate the time we've had, and it was great to kind of reconnect again.
John.
So this was a real joy. So thank you.